Hey guys, I wanted to record a short video because some of you had a lot of trouble on the graphing with the lab that you were working on. And so I have my data here, and this is just kind of the finished product of a nice linear trend. You can see I've labeled everything on my X and Y axis. You've got force versus the ratio. Um, and there's lots of ways you could have done this lab, but to kind of show you what it should look like, let me go over to my other tab here. You can see here in this lab, you were obviously investigating the gravitational force, which is G m1 m2 over r squared. And so based on the data you collected, you should have chosen to manipulate just one variable. It looked like a lot of people chose multiple variables, which would complicate this pretty greatly. But in my example, I just kept mass B constant and the radius between the objects constant and changed mass 1. And so by looking at that, I can see that as mass 1 increases, my gravitational force increases, as can be seen since the exponent goes from times 10 to the negative ninth up to 10 to the negative eighth. So it multiplies by a factor of 100, or at least 10. But regardless of that, when you're trying to analyze and figure out how this data can be graphed to give you, always happens. When you're creating your graph, you need this ratio. And so if you're not familiar with what this is showing us, let me just delete it for a second. Pretty much looking at our line point slope form here, y equals mx compared to f g m1 m2 over r squared. If your goal is to get a line with the slope of g, then x needs to be everything else in the equation, and y needs to be this other thing in the equation, which is the force. And it doesn't matter which one you pick, force 1 or force 2, since they're the same on each object. But if I arrange my equations such that mass 1 times mass 2 divided by r squared is one of my columns of data, I can graph those columns, force, and whatever that ratio is, to give me a nice slope. And so the way you do that is pretty much you come in here, and I'm just going to label it as ratio of mass over r squared, understanding that that's going to be equals. Always start with equals to write a formula. Click on my mass 1 value, which is 50, then shift 8, which is multiplied by mass 2, and it divides by the radius squared. And if it won't work for you to do like this, you could also just do C2 times C2, since that's the same cell and you're multiplying by it twice. You might want to put that in parentheses in the denominator just to ensure that it's following order of operations. Now, Google Sheets just added this new thing about suggested autofills, which pretty much you can press the check mark, which is going to do it for you. But all that's doing is taking this formula and dragging it down into all these other ones. So for us old timers who learned how to do this on Excel, all you have to do is grab this little box right here, drag it down, and then release, and that will copy the formula, but it will change the values. You can see now instead of A2, B2, and C2, it's using A3, B3, and C3. And so it's actually corresponding with the next three values. For the same one, same thing. It goes A4, B4, C4. And so then, theoretically, I could grab this data, hit my chart button. However, the only thing that's different is I don't actually want force on my x-axis. I want it on my y-axis. And so there's two ways you can do that. One, I can go in and insert a chart, and then I can just manually add my x-axis. I want ratio there. And then I can add a series. Let me change it to a scatter point. Move myself off over here. And then on my series, which is my y-axis, I would do force. Oops. And my force data. Move out of the way. Okay, and then let me move it back up so you can see. So then you can see I have forces here. I have on my x-axis the ratio that I created based on the fact that I need all of this x values, get out of the way. All of these x values need to be this product. And so then I can see that I've got a nice trend line. Looks kind of linear, but my x-axis is weird, so for now it doesn't look right. But let me delete that and show you the other way to do this. If that made no sense, if you're like, I don't know how to use chart editor, that's too much work. Let me just delete this. The other thing you can do is copy this force data. So if I just do Control-C, copy. Click on my cell here, F, next to E, paste it, Control-V. Anytime you have a row and a column, Google Sheets is going to take the first column and put it on the x-axis. So instead of having to manually build it backwards, if I do it like this and highlight this data and just hit my chart button, it's going to automatically realize that I want force here and then my x values here, since it's in my first column. So the last thing you would want to do is go down to horizontal axis and probably change your minimum value to 0. That way you can actually see the full data set. And then of course you can add your trend line under the series options here. Do a nice linear trend line, use the equation, and you should get 6.67, 6.68 times 10 to the negative 11th. So if you had trouble with the graph, that's what you should do. If your data is bad, you might need more data. It took me a few minutes to get this data just by, again, holding mass 2 constant, radius constant, and changing the mass 1 to get different force values. So hopefully that's helpful. And if you're still having trouble, you can try again.